Welcome to the AI Analysis Podcast. Today, we have a very interesting video to talk about, and we think it will resonate with a lot of people. Because, well, imagine you were working 50 hours a week, you're doing everything right, putting a chunk of your paycheck into savings every single month.
Oh, right. Playing by the rules.
Exactly. Playing by the rules. And yet somehow, the house you want to buy just keeps slipping further and further out of reach.
Yeah.
It honestly feels like you are running on a treadmill, and someone behind a curtain is just secretly speeding up the belt while cranking up the incline.
It's exhausting.
It really is. That ambient financial anxiety, that quiet suspicion that the whole economic game is just rigged against you is exactly what we are unpacking today.
Yeah, and it is a universal frustration, especially for anyone, really anyone under the age of 45 right now. We are told to play by the rules, but the rules themselves seem to just be shifting under our feet constantly. And today, we're going to explore the actual mechanics of exactly how that shift is happening.
And to do that, we watched this really fascinating interview from episode 38 of the Arete Podcast. They featured an interview with Paul Musson. He's a former mutual fund manager. And what I found so compelling about this video is that it completely strips away the usual political talking points.
Which is so refreshing, honestly.
Right. Musson spent nearly 3 decades on the inside of the financial industry. So he gives us this real insider's view on the hidden costs of what he calls easy money and how central banks have just fundamentally re-engineered the economy. I like to think of it like playing a board game where the bank keeps secretly changing the rules in favor of the player who already owns the most properties.
Yeah.
And the rest of the players are just left feeling like they're going completely crazy.
That is a very accurate analogy. And Musson is an interesting figure for this because he doesn't fit that stereotype of a flashy Wall Street trader screaming on a trading floor.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah, for 30 years, he was an investment analyst who actually preferred the quiet solitude of his office. He would literally close his door and just read a company's annual reports.
Just doing the boring, gritty math.
Exactly. He was searching for genuinely good businesses that created real, tangible value rather than just riding these speculative financial bubbles that pop up.
And to really understand what went wrong with our financial system, we first need to establish what real, tangible value actually looks like, right? Like how things should work in a healthy environment. Musson uses this brilliant elemental analogy in the interview, The Suit and Bike Economy.
I love this one.
Yeah, he explains that true, healthy capitalism relies entirely on the creation of capital.
Let's break down the mechanics of that for a second. In a functioning free market, if you, say, spend your time and energy and resources building a bicycle from scratch in your garage.
Okay, I have a bike.
Right. And someone else in your town uses their time and resources to tailor a nice suit, and you two decide to trade with each other, you have both mutually benefited.
Because we've essentially materialized wealth out of our own labor.
Yeah.
Right. There is literally one more bike and one more suit in the world today than there was yesterday. So the total economic pie actually got larger. And importantly, our little trade didn't harm anyone else in the village. It was a completely positive-sum game.
Exactly the point. The economy grew because of productive effort. But this raises a really crucial distinction that trips up a lot of people when they look at the economy today.
Well, let me actually push back on this right here, because this is where my own economic logic always hits a brick wall.
Go for it.
If the creation of goods and services, the bikes and the suits, is what drives a healthy economy, then shouldn't a rising stock market be the ultimate proof that we're making lots of bikes and suits? Like, I look at the stock market hitting all-time highs almost every week, and my instinct is to think, wow, companies must be incredibly productive right now.
Yeah, that is the logical assumption to make. I mean, if the market is a measuring stick for economic health, a higher number should definitely mean a healthier economy. And Musson points out that, historically speaking, that actually used to be true.
Oh, it did?
Yeah. Decades ago, a rising market meant capital was being allocated efficiently to, build better factories, design better products, and hire more workers. But today, the measuring stick itself is broken. A soaring stock market is no longer a symptom of a booming suit and bike economy. It is actually a symptom of central bank intervention.
Which brings us to the rule changes in that board game.
Yeah.
The point where the central banks decided to start tinkering with the game board.
Yeah. And this started happening in earnest around 2001, but it accelerated massively after the 2008 financial crisis. To understand what broke, we really have to look at the engine of the free market, which is something called the price discovery mechanism.
Okay, so let's break down the mechanics of price discovery, because it sounds like serious financial jargon, but the video made it clear it's actually just a very natural human negotiation.
It really is just basic human nature.
Yeah.
Musson uses a loan to Apple as his primary example here. So let's say Apple wants to borrow $10,000 from you. You look at their business model, you weigh the risk of them defaulting on the loan, you consider what inflation is doing, and you say, okay, I will lend you the money, but I demand a 10% interest rate to compensate me for taking on that risk.
Right, so that organic negotiation between me, the borrower, and Apple, the lender, that determines the true cost of money.
Exactly. That is price discovery in action.
The market naturally decides what risk is actually worth. So if a company is super risky, lenders are going to demand a 15% return. If it's incredibly safe, maybe they only demand 4%.
Right. But what happens when a central bank steps in? During an economic downturn, the central bank decides they want to stimulate the economy by making borrowing much cheaper. So they artificially force interest rates down.
By printing money, right?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
They flood the banking system with liquidity, essentially buying up bonds to drive the yield down. So suddenly, instead of that natural 10% rate that you negotiated, the central bank dictates that interest rates across the board are just going to be 3%.
But wait, if we look back at 2008, didn't central banks kind of have to do that? I mean, if they hadn't stepped in and slashed rates to zero, wouldn't we have faced a total collapse of the entire global financial system? Weren't they basically just choosing the lesser of two evils to save the economy?
Well, that is exactly how policymakers justified it at the time. They viewed it as emergency triage to stop the bleeding in the ER. But the problem, as Musson highlights so well, is that the emergency policies never actually stopped.
Oh.
They kept rates artificially suppressed for over a decade, and when you manipulate the cost of capital for that long, capital gets severely misallocated. It literally stops behaving rationally.
Because if money is practically free to borrow, it doesn't just flow to the innovative companies making the best suits and bikes, right?
Yeah.
It flows to anyone with a pulse. It removes the natural filter that separates good businesses from bad businesses.
Precisely. And this leads to one of the most alarming statistics in the entire video. Because of this artificial suppression of interest rates over the last 20 years, roughly 17% of listed companies globally are now classified as zombies.
Wait, 17%? Like almost 1 in 5 publicly traded companies is a zombie.
Yes.
That is wild. Let's explain the mechanics of what a zombie company actually is, because it's honestly terrifying.
It is. A zombie company is a business that doesn't even generate enough operating profit to cover the interest payments on its own debt.
Wow.
Yeah. In a normal, healthy market with natural interest rates, these companies would quickly go bankrupt, which, clears the dead wood out of the forest and frees up resources and capital for new, innovative companies.
But because central banks made debt so incredibly cheap for so long, these failing companies can just roll their old debt into new, cheap debt. They survive purely on a drip feed of artificially low interest rates. I think Musson compared it to a homeowner who doesn't make enough money to pay their mortgage, so every single month they just put their mortgage interest on a brand new credit card.
Exactly. It is mathematically unsustainable.
It makes me think of an athlete who fractures their leg mid-season. The central bank is essentially the team doctor, just pumping the athlete full of heavy painkillers.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. The athlete feels great. They can run back out onto the field, which is the stock market hitting all-time highs, and all the fans are cheering. But mechanically, with every step they take on that fractured leg, they are grinding their foundational bone structure into dust. The pain is masked, but the structural damage is getting worse every single day.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The entire financial system is completely numb to risk. And while keeping zombie companies alive on Wall Street is bad enough, Musson makes it painfully clear that this exact same mechanism is the direct cause of the crisis we see on Main Street. Specifically, the housing market.
Yeah. If cheap money warps the corporate world that badly, what does it do when it hits the consumer level? If you are someone who is trying to buy a home any time in the last few years, this is the part of the conversation that will explain exactly why you feel so incredibly squeezed.
Definitely. So following the dot-com crash in the early 2000s, policymakers actively decided to engineer something called a wealth effect in the housing market. They slashed interest rates down to 1%. And they knew that if mortgage rates plummeted, buyers could suddenly afford to take out much, much larger loans.
And if everyone can suddenly borrow an extra $200,000, what happens? They all just bid against each other, and the price of the house simply absorbs that extra borrowing capacity. The house price skyrockets.
Exactly. The policymakers literally wanted people to look at their soaring home values, feel incredibly wealthy, and then go out and spend money, buy cars, take vacations, renovate their kitchens, all just to boost the GDP.
They intentionally used houses like giant ATM machines to stimulate the economy. But the long-term, real-world impact of keeping rates at those emergency levels has been absolutely catastrophic for the younger generation. The video brought up some really stark realities. The average age of a first-time homebuyer in America has now been pushed to 40 years old.
40. It alters the entire trajectory of a society. Musson even referenced research showing that global fertility rates are dropping explicitly because young people look at the cost of housing and realize they simply cannot afford to start families.
It's so sad.
It is. This is no longer just a financial issue, It has morphed into a full-blown demographic crisis, directly engineered by monetary policy.
What I really appreciated about Musson in this segment of the interview was his total transparency about his own wealth. He talked about his own house in a suburb of Toronto. He bought it in 2001, and today it is literally quadrupled in value.
Yeah, a massive increase.
But he breaks down the reality of what that actually means. He says, he didn't add 4 new wings to the house. He didn't invent a revolutionary new technology in the basement.
Right. The physical utility of the house, the shelter it provides, is exactly the same today as it was in 2001. No new suits or bikes were created.
Exactly. It quadrupled entirely because the central bank inflated the asset price. And Musson bluntly calls this an immoral redistribution of wealth.
Which is a heavy phrase, but it fits.
It does. The equity he gained wasn't created out of thin air. It was functionally extracted from the future purchasing power of the next generation. A young family today has to take on 4 times the debt, essentially siphoning away their future wages, just to buy the exact same standard of living. It is literally a wealth transfer from the youth to fund the retirements of the asset holding class.
It's a very sobering realization, but it naturally leads to a question of intent. If you're a young person looking at this dynamic, it's very easy to assume this was an intentional, malicious conspiracy. Like, did a group of policymakers deliberately decide to bleed the youth dry?
Musson is very careful to clarify this point. He doesn't believe it was a conspiracy at all. The older generation didn't do anything inherently evil, right? They just played the system they were handed. If your house goes up in value, you don't complain to the bank.
Right. No one gives the money back.
Exactly. And as for the central bankers, he thinks they just foolishly believed in a trickle-down effect. They genuinely thought that by inflating asset prices, the resulting economic activity would eventually create enough jobs and prosperity to just lift everyone up.
It is the ultimate example of unintended consequences.
It really is. When we talk about the difference between real value creation, making actual things, and the artificial inflation of assets.
As far back as I can remember, I have wanted to be an entrepreneur. Now, I am here to guide you through the intricate paths of building your business, embracing emerging technologies and navigating the startup world. I am Saul Tarazona, and this is Startup Corps, your go-to podcast for entrepreneurial insights and tech-driven success.
The financial economy, on the other hand, is what happens when money just circles the drain, bidding up the prices of existing houses and stocks without actually building anything new.
Which brings us to the most insidious part of this entire dynamic. If everyday consumers are choking on artificially inflated housing debt, how's the government managing its own massive multi-trillion-dollar national debt? Because ultimately, the government isn't immune to mathematics.
But they do have a tool that you and I definitely don't have. If I get into too much debt, I go bankrupt. If the government gets into too much debt, they use a strategy called financial repression.
Financial repression is essentially how governments default on their debt in slow motion.
In slow motion, wow.
Yeah. When a government owes trillions of dollars, they basically have 3 options. First, they can explicitly default and refuse to pay, which destroys the country's credit rating and causes a global meltdown. Second, they can raise taxes massively and cut spending, which is political suicide. Politicians who do that get voted out immediately.
Nobody votes for higher taxes.
Yeah.
So they go with option 3, the hidden tax.
Exactly. They intentionally allow or even directly cause inflation to rise higher than the interest rate they are paying on their debt. By doing this, the real cost of their debt shrinks over time. And as Musson points out, this isn't a partisan issue. Both sides of the political aisle are entirely guilty of deficit spending and relying on this hidden mechanism to make the math work.
I really want to drill down into how this hidden tax functions mechanically, because Musson used the 10 bikes analogy in the interview, and it made the math so crystal clear.
Let's walk through it. Imagine you work hard all year building bicycles. You sell them, and you save $10,000 in your bank account. In real-world purchasing power, that $10,000 represents the value of 10 bicycles. You have effectively stored the value of your physical labor in the banking system.
Okay, so I have my 10 bikes worth of cash safely tucked away for the future.
Right. Now, the government realizes it has bills it cannot pay through regular taxation. So the central bank steps in and essentially doubles the money supply by printing trillions of new dollars out of thin air to buy government bonds.
Just creating money.
Exactly.
Wow.
But crucially, they didn't create any new bikes or suits, right? They just created more paper currency. Because there are now twice as many dollars floating around chasing the exact same amount of goods, the prices of everything double. Inflation spikes.
So I checked my bank statement online, and the nominal number still says $10,000. It looks like I haven't lost a single dime.
But when you go to the store to spend it, that $10,000 now only buys 5 bicycles. Your purchasing power has been cut in half. The government effectively confiscated the value of 5 of your bikes to pay their own debts, and they did it without ever having to pass a formal tax law through Congress.
That is mind-blowing when you apply it to recent events. Like, it forces you to completely reevaluate things like the $1,200 COVID stimulus checks. When those checks arrived in the mail, it felt incredible. It felt like free money from the government.
But there is no such thing as free money.
Exactly. It's a bitter pill to swallow when you finally understand the mechanics. Because the government printed trillions to fund those checks. You are now paying for that initial $1,200 through a 25% invisible inflation tax every single time you buy groceries or gas or pay rent. You didn't get free money. You were essentially forced to take out a high-interest loan against your own future purchasing power.
And this mechanism isn't entirely new either. The video highlights 1971 as a really critical turning point. That was the year the U.S. abandoned the gold standard.
Right, the Nixon shock.
Yes. Once the currency was no longer pegged to a physical asset like gold, central banks had the ultimate freedom to expand the money supply whenever they wanted. And if you look at historical economic charts, 1971 is the exact moment where worker productivity and worker wages completely decoupled.
Because workers kept getting more and more efficient thanks to technology and better processes, but their wages just flatlined in terms of real purchasing power. Meanwhile, the prices of hard assets like real estate and stocks shot straight up.
It's the ultimate manifestation of financial repression.
It really is. The value of labor was quietly diluted to inflate the value of assets.
Which naturally leads to the final and perhaps most urgent part of Musson's analysis. If the whole system relies on endless debt expansion and currency dilution, where is the off-ramp? Is there a way to fix the tracks, or are we just mathematically bound for a crash?
Well, Musson is adamant that you can only bend the math so far before it literally breaks. He points to programs like Social Security in the U.S., which is facing mathematical insolvency by 2033 based on current trajectories.
That's not far away.
Not at all. The system will eventually hit a wall. So what are his solutions for, a soft landing?
Well, they require incredibly tough medicine. First, he argues that central banks must stop artificially increasing the money supply to fund government deficits, period. Second, they have to stop stepping in to bail out Wall Street every time the market takes a downturn. The financial sector just has to be allowed to feel the consequences of bad risks.
They need to face real price discovery.
Exactly. Third, we have to let interest rates find their natural market-driven level, even if that means a really painful period of adjustment as those zombie companies finally go bankrupt.
And his final solution is one I found particularly compelling. He says we have to deliberately shrink the finance and government sectors.
Yes. His argument is that the financial sector was only ever supposed to be a facilitator of the economy, not the main engine. If you shrink the oversized profits in finance, the brightest mathematical minds graduating from universities won't just flock to hedge funds to engineer complex derivatives.
Right. They will be redirected into productive fields, like engineering, medicine, and manufacturing. They will go back to building a better suit and bike.
Which is what we actually need.
But on a personal level, while we are waiting for policymakers to wake up and take that tough medicine, how does an insider like Paul Musson protect his own wealth?
His personal strategy is deeply tied to everything we've discussed today. He avoids passive index funds entirely. Index funds are designed to blindly buy stocks across the board, which means they are automatically funneling money into massively overvalued companies and zombies.
Just buying the bad with the good.
Right. So instead, he focuses on high-quality, active stock picking. He's finding those rare companies with strong balance sheets that actually generate real profits.
He also mentioned he holds real estate and cash. But the most interesting part of his defense strategy to me was gold.
He explicitly refers to gold as a hedge against central bank lunacy. The logic is purely mechanical, really. A central bank can print trillions of digital dollars with a keystroke, diluting the value of the currency. But they cannot print an ounce of physical gold, and they cannot print an acre of land. Hard assets offer protection against fiat currency manipulation.
You know, this brings up a cultural trend that I think ties everything together. We see this everywhere online right now. It's the YOLO and FOMO mentalities.
Yeah.
You have an entire generation of young people looking at the math, the impossible housing prices, the grocery inflation, the stagnant wages, and they are simply throwing their hand up in financial nihilism.
This is a very real phenomenon.
They look at the board game, they realize the bank is rigged against them, and they decide, well, I'll never be able to afford a house anyway, so I might as well blow my entire paycheck on a luxury vacation right now. You only live once.
And honestly, it is a deeply rational emotional response to an irrational, heavily manipulated economic system. When saving feels like a guaranteed loss due to inflation, consumption feels like the only logical choice left. But Musson actively pushes back against this despair in the interview.
He actually offers a very optimistic counter-narrative, which I loved.
He does. He urges young people not to give up, because change is mathematically inevitable. The current debt trajectory simply cannot continue forever. But he is realistic about how that change will happen. It will not be handed down gracefully by policymakers who suddenly decide to do the right thing.
It has to come from the bottom up. It requires a grassroots movement of people who finally understand the mechanics of price discovery and inflation, who demand honest financial math, and who refuse to support politicians promising free money. Because they now know that free money is just a hidden tax on their own future.
Exactly. Understanding the mechanics is the very first step to reclaiming your agency in all of this.
So, as we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, what does this mean for you, the listener? The immense wealth disparity, the crushing cost of living, the feeling that you are falling behind despite working harder. None of this is a natural law of the universe. It is a direct symptom of a manipulated market. The measuring stick was broken. Central banks short-circuited the system, and in doing so, they stopped rewarding genuine value creation and started rewarding proximity to cheap debt.
But once you understand how the system is wired, it fundamentally changes how you navigate it. It changes how you view the erosion of your savings, how you evaluate taking on debt, and how you scrutinize the economic promises made on the evening news. You can finally see the underlying architecture of the board game.
It gives you the clarity to stop blaming yourself for a game whose rules were changed mid-play.
And if we step back and look at the grand sweep of this, it leaves us with one incredibly profound question to mull over. If our modern financial system has spent the last 2 decades normalizing the extraction of wealth from the future to fund the illusion of prosperity in the present, what happens when that future finally arrives and there is no more purchasing power left to pull from?
Wow. That is the multi-trillion-dollar question.
Will the mathematical wall force a massive societal shift away from financial engineering, forcing us to return to an economy based entirely on tangible, non-printable assets? Things like physical skills, genuine innovation, land, and deep community resources, simply to survive the correction.
It's a sobering thought, but an essential one to consider as we watch the market continue to test its limits. The bank can only artificially inflate the game for so long before the players understand the mechanics, refuse to accept the hidden taxes, and decide it's time to rewrite the rules entirely. Thank you so much for joining us for our analysis today. We hope this gave you a new lens through which to view the economy, and more importantly, the tools to protect your own suits and bikes in the years ahead. We'll catch you next time.